I'm Bronwyn Williams. We're back with The Small Print, and today our guest is Bruce Whitfield. Bruce, on this show, we ask our guests to introduce themselves the way they want to be introduced. So over to you. Who are you?
You didn't warn me, so now I've got to think of my feet, and I don't like this part. I'm used to interviewing other people. My day job is putting people under pressure. I was counting the other day that I must have done over the last 20 years about 35,000 interviews, and I've been interviewed a handful of times in return and hated each and every single one of them. So thank you for that. My name is Bruce Whitfield. I am a journalist. I've written 2 books. That's The Upside Down, and that is Genius, How to Take Smart Ideas Global, soon to come out in a brand new edition, Genius, How to Thrive at the Edge of Chaos. How to Take Smart Ideas Global was a bit niche-y. And so we're expanding its viewpoint with the world of how to thrive at the edge of chaos. I'm an optimist. I'd like to see the world as the world of the possible. I believe that nothing is preordained. Just because we have a climate crisis, I see climate crisis as an opportunity. I see corruption as an opportunity, not as an opportunity to partake in, of course, but as an opportunity to defeat. I think there's a business opportunity in practically everything on earth. And I think that if we capitulate in the face of difficulty, we do ourselves a massive disservice. I like to highlight people who are brilliant at what they do. I like to tell their stories. I like to help them tell their stories. And I like to pull those together in ways that are accessible and are easy for people to interpret and to consume, and hopefully make people feel better about the world and see the world as being slightly more opportunistic, or a place of greater opportunity than a place only of despair, hardship, destruction, misery, and just downright hell and bedlam, which is, I think, where much of the world sits right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Being an optimist is a rather contrarian take at the moment. I know that if you even put those sort of words out there, people tend to get even quite angry at you. How dare you be optimistic? How do you want that?
If you don't believe the future is better than the present, or you don't believe that the future can be better than the present, then shoot yourself now. Save yourself a lifetime of pain and suffering. Put yourself and everybody around you out of their misery and do yourself in. Because if you're going to sit there like Eeyore, from the Winnie the Pooh books. And, you know, if you say typically to a South African, and I talk mostly to South African audiences, but if you say to a South African, what a lovely sunny day we're having, South Africans will say, yeah, I'm going to get skin cancer. You know, you need to have more of a sort of a Tigger approach, just a bounding about, you know, not a blind willfulness. The future is going to be great. You've got to make the future better. And great people do contribute to making, in small parts and in minuscule parts, contribute to making the world a better place over time. And every now and again, the world pulls back and we have a terrible time, like we have in the last 2 or 3 years, where we've gone through a pandemic. It was catastrophically awful. Let's not pretend it wasn't. Economic contraction, millions of people lost their jobs. 650, 700 million people in the world died. It's considerably fewer than died in the last global pandemic of 1919 to 1922. Vaccines came to market considerably more quickly than at any other time in human history. Human development has made today possible and will continue to make tomorrow better in many, many respects. Not in every respect, every single day, all the time, but in most respects, most of the time. And on balance, things get better off over time.
Well, I would put it, optimism is a necessary condition for the future being better, but it is far from sufficient. So that brings us to the books.
I agree with you. Optimism by itself is an emotion. I mean, it's an absolutely worthless emotion. Oh, I'm an optimist. Well, that's nice.
Lovely.
What are you going to do to make sure that that optimism is rewarded with a reality in the future? No, optimism without action is an emotion which is worthless. So I think we can work on this, actually. Optimism with action is a better future.
Yeah, exactly. So it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. You also have to do something about it. Otherwise, you're pretty much like South Africa has been for the last, I don't know, in living memory. Let's put it that way. I mean, I've written essays on this too. Our greatest strength and our greatest weakness is the fact that we kind of make a plan and we are quite patient. And I think that
maybe that's one of our greatest.
It's not described to us enough. We are very patient people.
one of our greatest downfalls is that we are so patient. It was like, oh, okay, I know you've cocked it up for 30 years. We'll give you another chance because, this time it'll be different. There's a quote that goes back to the 1940s. It's ascribed to Jan Smuts, but his biographer tells me it wasn't Jan Smuts. It was somebody else from that time. South Africa is a peculiar kind of place where things are never as bad as they could be, but never as good as they should be. And it's that reality of like, it's so frustrating that's a statement that somebody made 75, 80 years ago. And it's so absolutely true today as it was back then. People were having these debates in the 1940s as the National Party was rising to dominance, as the United Party was losing traction, as Jan Smuts' attention was elsewhere on building the Commonwealth, on building a post-war collaboration for the world and creating the United Nations. He took his eye off the South African ball, pretty much like Thabo Mbeki did with his African Renaissance of the mid to late 2000s. And South Africa suffered as a result. And I think we've gone through a similar thing this time around.
This time around, yes, we're still here. We're still carrying on, but there's very few of us that are both optimistic and active about it. So if optimism is unpopular at the moment or not politically,
I know, which makes it so much fun. And by the way, I'm having a cup of tea. So I hope you don't mind. It's my kids gave me the mug. I apologize for the mug.
Not at all. And then if active optimism then is even more scarce, that's of course a great place for competitive advantage, right? I mean, this is how you make a fortune, right? In places where other people don't go, and the areas of the maps where here there be dragons, right?
Completely. I mean, so Genius, the book over there, and to a lesser extent, The Upside of Down there, highlights cases. And Bidvest, I don't know if they still have it now, but Bidvest, certainly when Brian Joffe was there, had a sign up saying, Bidvest does not participate in any recession. And you go, what? What? How can you not participate in a recession? A recession is a thing. It's around you all the time. You are in it. It is part of you. You are part of it. It was just the mindset of Joffe going, well, if we allow ourselves to be caught in the same negativity trap as everybody else, well, then how do we make greater progress than our competitors do? How do we accelerate our opportunity? How do we grow? If we navigate rather than are obstructed by difficulty, if we navigate the difficulty, we will succeed. If our competitors are sitting wringing their hands and panicking and having midnight meetings and losing sleep, well, they will be weaker for it. We'll be stronger. Somebody you might know, Pavlo Fatidis, he runs Auric Business Accelerator, was telling me the other day he was in KwaZulu-Natal and he walked into a room of 80 to 100 entrepreneurs. And he walked into a 1980s disco. Everybody was happy. They were bouncing off the walls. They were having the very, very best time. And he said to them, are you okay? And they said, yeah, never better. He said, but you do know that there was a massive insurrection in this province 18 months ago. On my way here from the airport, I could see the scorch marks still on the walls. I can still see broken windows in some places. You remember the insurrection. You remember the torn down fences. You remember the fear. You remember the bodies, the blood, the mayhem. If you've been down to the beach, Lacey, you've seen the sewerage in the ocean. Yep. And you're happy. Yep. Why? Well, our competitors have all given up and capitulated. We have no competition left. And it was the same answer my dad gave me when he turned 90 in the little village of Port Alfred. And I said, what's the best thing about being a 90-year-old man in Port Alfred? And he gave me a look with a glint in his eye and he said, there's no competition. And it's that thing of those, I mean, it's not true for everybody and it's not true all the time. But generally speaking, if you've got a great idea, you implement your great idea and you are able to navigate the treacherous waters, particularly of the environment in which we are, you are more likely to be successful than those who sort of wait for, if you read Dr. Seuss's, Oh, the Places You Will Go, the waiting place, waiting for a bus to come, waiting for the weather to change, waiting for the sun to shine, waiting, just waiting. And it's this thing, why sit and wait? Adrian Gore at Discovery lives by that philosophy. If you just wait in the waiting place, you're never going to get moving. You've always got to be making small incremental gains, each and every single day, minuscule gains over time compound and add enormous value. And you cannot be distracted by short-term uncertainty, short-term insecurity, and all of that sort of stuff. And that is what so many people in South Africa, unfortunately, are habitually wired to, is this absolute fear of the future.
it's being stuck in the waiting place. Again, that is something we see all the time with corporate clients, with individual citizens. There's definitely a sense that things haven't actually woken up since COVID, right? People are still locked down on the inside, or as Terry Pratchett says, the wits are inside their soul. They're not like on the outside, right? You know, we kind of keeping ourselves waiting for something to happen. And I think that was also a lot of subtext around a political situation where there's a sense that we're waiting for the next Messiah to sort of solve all of our problems. Many people thought that that was Cyril, that he was a Messiah, which you have to be a real optimist to have believe that a few years back. But I applaud the optimists who were optimistic about that being the case.
I have enormous empathy with the man. He's a lovely guy. And he's got a particular character and a particular nature of compromise and all that. It's frustrating as hell to watch him operate. But I do not think that we would have made, and I will argue this till I'm blue in the face against the biggest pessimist in the world. I think South Africa has made enormous progress, almost invisible progress over the last 5 years. I mean, who believed for a moment that Jacob Zuma would spend even a single night in jail for whatever offense that he committed? He was accused and then convicted of contempt of court because he refused to participate in a perfectly legitimate legal process, which he instituted, by the way, the Zondo Commission, and then tried to illegitimize, if that's a word, and then refused to collaborate with it. And then was condemned and went to jail for it. I mean, the idea that Jacob Zuma could spend a night in jail fills my heart with joy, and he will go back if justice is done. And he continues to pervert the course of justice in South Africa all the time because he's been allowed to get away with it. He's like a 3-year-old in a supermarket who's ripping sweeties off the shelves and nobody's saying no. And the moment somebody says no, the kid has a tantrum, and the kid then has to be put back in the shopping trolley and taught a little lesson in humility. And I'm afraid that's where we are.
Yeah, I suppose my point is more that if we're waiting for one person, one guy to stand up and save us, it's not going to happen, right?
We must have Imtiaz Suleiman as our president. He doesn't want that.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. There's not one person. There's not a fairy godmother. There's not a sort of Dias Machina moment where someone's going to come in and sort of solve all the problems with a magic wand. And there it is, all good, all happy, back to normal. You can't just wait for that to happen. We have to do something about it, even if that's not particularly fun or it's very scary, of course. But the book that you've written more recently, I mean, when did Genius come out? Was it around May last year?
May last year, and second edition, did I mention there's a second edition, comes out in February of 2023.
Available at your nearest bookseller.
It better be, otherwise we're going to have words with the bookseller. I regularly harangue Grattan Kirk when I go into a bookshop and I film the bookshelves. Where is it? He's very patient and very tolerant. But
if it's not there, call them and demand it. This is how you support local businesses. Again, this is taking a moment to give a little sermon here. You got to support more what you want more of. This is the optimism in action, is purchasing things that you want to see more of and spending your time and attention on things that you want to see more of and not the opposite. Because what my very expensive degrees in economics have taught me is that at a very simple level, your expectations do create your reality. So if you have negative expectations, you are very literally, very practically increasing the chances that your future is going to be duller, dimmer, smaller, and poorer than if you expected the opposite. So,
which is why South Africans have got this very myopic view of the future. They become, your view is far more erudite than mine, but the Stockholm syndrome sort of approach of, well, we're in it, there's nothing we can do. So
why bother? And then nothing gets done. Nothing will change.
Exactly.
I voted then for the status quo by doing nothing, right? If you want to vote against it, you have to do something differently, right? Same if you want to change your weight, change your relationships, anything else, you have to kind of actually do something about it. Or you're going to be waiting for a very long time, because whether you want to hear this or not, lifespans are increasing, as Bruce said. That's something that you can be optimistic about if you are.
I don't know. Can you afford to last any longer than 70? I think that was the biblical reference, wasn't it? There we go.
Well, again, your expectations are going to change that, right? If you expect that we're going to be in a perma crisis and a perma recession, you're certainly not going to invest anything new. You're not going to try any new ideas. You're going to hoard your capital that you have in an offshore trust fund account or something else. And by the same token, you're going to accelerate the odds of the negative future that you want occurring, right? This is something South Africans have to understand, which is
how are pessimists useful? Here's my question to you. Are pessimists useful people?
Well, of course they are, because we live in a capitalist society, and that means that there's always another side to every trade, right? So for every pessimist, there's an optimist taking advantage of the other side of that. The unfortunate thing is when your country has a surplus of pessimists and other countries have a surplus of optimists, what ends up happening is your pessimists end up, selling the future to more optimistic people that might not be onshore, which is unfair for the few optimists left behind. This is the sort of the unfairness of our zero-sum based capitalist system. But you got to choose what side of that equation you want to be on, because someone's taking the other side of that deal.
Absolutely.
Want to be you and your friends. But anyway, let's get back to your book. Eventually, we'll focus and do this properly. Genius, that's quite a bold title. How did you come up with that?
I like
you referring to yourself or to the character?
It's my autobiography, you see. It's I thought, well, how do I best describe myself? And blithering idiot was too long for the cover. I wanted
literally Bruce Whitfield genius. That's what you can see on the screen.
I'm looking to see whether or not advertising works. So far, it hasn't. So upside down, the cover worked really nicely because the upside down eye on upside down over there worked really well. So we wanted a cover, we wanted a title that had an eye in it that we could flick upside down. And so I then tried a couple of things, and then suddenly one day genius sprung into mind. I said, yeah, there's a particular kind of genius to succeed in South Africa, and a particular kind of genius and a remarkable kind of genius that not only succeeds in South Africa, but learns some really tough lessons in South Africa and then expands those ideas and those operations and those projects globally. I think that's worthy of the title genius. And if you look at many of the people who've done it, I think they would fall into that category of genius. The only problem was that the moment you take a word genius and you flip the I upside down, it looks sarcastic. Genius. And so it screamed sarcasm at me. And so I was like, it doesn't work. But we've gone too far down the line. So we put a globe on the eye of genius and it works. It's a nice title. And it's big and it's bold, like you have to be if you're going to succeed.
Okay, so tell us about some of the geniuses that you have put inside the book. I mean, you covered everything from sort of wine and glue and all sorts of various different industries you got going on there. But what is the oldest story in the book, and what is the newest one? Because you obviously started writing.
You are testing me. I suppose one of the older ones is De Beers. And De Beers is a story of marketing genius second to none. If you know a little bit about the history of South Africa, in the 1870s, of course, South Africa was absolutely nowhere. It had been at the epicenter of the global economy for a couple of hundred years, ever since Vasco, the Portuguese, had sort of come around the Cape and had mapped the Cape and had found the trade route to India. The Cape, certainly as a stop-off point, was at the global epicenter of the world economy. It was the link between East and West. It was also the link on the slave trade from Asia and into the West as well. And of course, in the prison trade out of the United Kingdom into Australia, all prisoners had to come via South Africa to be sent off to colonize Australia. So South Africa had a very important role, but gradually that role dissipated as steam power came in and as technologies improved and as refrigeration happened, and the Cape was no longer that relevant until one day a kid is playing on the banks of the Orange River and picks up a different looking stone and takes it home. And the parent looks at it and goes, well, that's different. I tell you what, we'll give it to the traveling salesman who comes by here and he can tell us if it's one of these diamond things that people are talking about. The traveling salesman takes it off, isn't sure, so pops it in an envelope and sends it. I think, was it the Hope diamond that went there, or was it the Cullen? Did Atherstone diagnose that particular? So anyway, I don't want to mix my historical analogies up. It's not that fresh in my mind. But anyway, this diamond was sent by post around South Africa to be verified. And once it was verified, the world descended on this part of the world at a place which is now called Hope Town. And just north of Hope Town was a little koppie which then was drilled down into, becoming the biggest open cast diamond mine in the world at Kimberley.
You should go look at it. It's fun.
It is. It's beautiful. The town's
still pick up garnets off the ground there. Like you just go home with handfuls of garnets. It's crazy.
It's insane. It's a remarkable place, but a tragic place. And it actually destroyed the global diamond industry up until that point. Royalty had diamonds, and diamonds were massively elitist. And then, suddenly the world was flooded with diamonds. There were too many. And so Cecil John Rhodes, Barney Bonato, and that crowd set it about consolidating the Kimberley diamond fields, created the De Beers diamond mine, and that was fine, and their successors mined the diamonds, and it all worked absolutely fine. But by the mid-20th century, De Beers realized that it had a problem of oversupply and under demand. So they hired an advertising agency called N.W. Iyer in New York City. And N.W. Iyer started seeding Hollywood with diamonds. So Liz Taylor would appear at the Oscars dripping in diamonds, and Marilyn Monroe would sing "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend." None of this stuff is accidental.
Hard-making women still sell. I mean, I know it's not politically correct to say so, but
apparently it works. So I am told. I mean, obviously I would never fall for that sort of stuff myself. But they also then started the various myths. The myth that a man should give up 3 months' wages for a diamond to show his true commitment to a relationship.
The price of love. I mean, and we talk about NFTs corrupting the soul, right?
Absolutely. But here they tell men you need to spend 3 months' salary, because what do women do? What is the first thing women do when women tell other women that they're engaged? What is the first question?
Ring.
Exactly. Show me. It isn't what's his name.
Show me how much he loves you.
Is he nice? No, it's show me. Because in show me, it is, ooh, it's a big rock. He's rich. Awesome. You're secure. And so that whole fallacy around this wealth and security and all of that sort of stuff is all encapsulated in a diamond. And it's all encapsulated in the myths created by N.W. Iyer, who then come up with an advertising slogan, "A diamond is forever." And they go, well, it's not very good, is it? But let's take it to the client and see what they say. And the client goes, "We love it, thank you very much." And it remains to this day the longest running advertising slogan in history. It's 73 years old.
Songs were written about it. It was in James Bond movies. I mean, it took off. Yeah.
Absolutely. So a diamond is forever. Then the Berlin Wall comes down in the late 1980s, early 1990s. The world changes. Suddenly there are Russian diamonds and all kinds of diamonds flooding the market once again. De Beers no longer has a monopoly on global diamond supply. Bugger, what does it do? Well, it says, you need a De Beers diamond because all these other diamonds are blood diamonds. They're bad diamonds. They're evil, dirty, bad diamonds. You need our diamonds. Our diamonds are picked by pixies, and they're happy and they're lovely and they eat well.
And our colonization centuries ago.
Yeah, but they're happy pixies now, and don't let facts get in the way of a good story. And De Beers creates this image of our diamonds are better than everybody else's diamonds. And just to prove that our diamonds are better, we put the forever mark in our diamonds. Now, I was recently in Bond Street in London, New Bond Street, and it is the ultimate street of luxury. It is an astonishing street of global brand bling. It's incredible. And right at the very top is De Beers. And you go in, I said, "Can I see the forever mark, please?" And they humored me and everything else. And they gave me one of the little jeweler's goodies. And I think I saw the forever mark, but it's microns deep. It's invisible to the naked eye. You've got to look at it with a jeweler's goodie, and you've got to see it. And that tells you that it's at least 2 carats in weight. It tells you that it is a De Beers diamond, and that gives you the comfort in knowing that he loves you so much that he bought you a diamond with a forever mark. So it came at a premium. It's a premium diamond. It is mine.
Paid extra for the carbon credits, for the certification, for the free trade stamp, all the rest of it.
Yeah, we're not thinking about that. It's all about love. Don't forget that. But yeah, so De Beers is probably one of the older stories in the book. And then there are a whole bunch of new, and many of them got edited out. I was a little bit agitated by that, but the book was actually just too long. I got excited toward the end and was throwing in stories left, right, and center.
Release it under a paywall, right? I'm giving you free marketing advice there. We want the stories. We need the stories.
No, so the stories will come in a podcast series, which is being launched in mid-February. So I'll do the obvious ones first, and then we'll, if we get a second season of podcasts, I'll tell the less obvious stories after that. But there are some remarkable South African entrepreneurs who are doing incredible things. There's lots of high-tech stuff. There's lots of low high-tech stuff. There's lots of technologically driven innovation happening. There's a group of guys whose company I now forget. They're based themselves in the Netherlands. One's Mexican, one's South African. And they devised a financing scheme for people to be able to buy their own Uber vehicles, for example. And they're running that out of the Netherlands right now. There's Aisha Pandal with Sweep South, and Katejo Mapai with Yoko, and a team of people who built these great enterprises. And Aisha Pandal goes, well, social problems in South Africa present great business opportunities. And you go, well, absolutely right. You don't, because they have social problems, it doesn't say that you have to run a charity to fix them. I mean, often sustainable solutions come from people who are prepared to make a little bit of money out of solving the problem. So if you can create an enterprise, a social enterprise, and earn yourself a living in the process, well, good on you, and provide opportunities for other. And that's certainly what Sweep South has been able to do, and that's expanded through the African continent. She raised a whole bunch of money last year again. Need to make contact with her again, but Kakeho I'm chatting to at the moment about the podcast. So there's a whole lot of stuff happening in the South African environment, and people being incredibly creative. I came across some nougat the other day called 1701. I'm not sure about the origins of the brand name, but I did a little bit of research, and it turns out that the guy who's making its dad is a famous property lawyer called Julian Scher. So Nick Scher is making this fantastic nougat. And we've had some amazing nougat emerge out of South Africa. Sally Williams, I think, started the revolution. And then Coach House in Mpumalanga took excess macadamia before the Chinese started buying all our supply and made their own nougat out of that. But now 1701 and Nick Scher has teamed up with Natasha Sideris. Natasha Sideris of Tasha's fame. She grew to capacity in South Africa. She always said she wouldn't do more than 20 or 22 stores in South Africa, and then she would expand globally. And I went and visited her in the United Arab Emirates toward the, was April last year, in 2022. And I went into her Tasha's in the central business district of Dubai. And she took me into her Planet Bar, and it is truly the most beautiful bar I've ever been into. And she was telling me about her Flamingo Club, and this one, she's got something like 25 outlets now in Dubai. She just signed a partnership deal with a guy in Saudi Arabia to take Tasha's into Saudi, and Saudi is beginning to open up to the rest of the world quite dramatically. And I think she's announced it. Well, if she hasn't, I'm doing it now. Within the M25, she'll have a London-based Tasha's, I think, next year. Was it this year? But certainly she's expanding, taking this restaurant concept where famous brands tried and they thought they could take Steers to the UK, and then they owned Wimpy with their own Wimpy in the UK, but it's not great. And then they bought Gourmet Burger Kitchen, and it was a lousy concept. I went and had a gourmet burger at Gourmet Burger Kitchen. It was neither gourmet, it was kind of burger. There was a kitchen, but it wasn't a great experience, and it's gone bust. It's gone. They were eaten by Five Guys. Spur burger is still better than a Five Guys burger. But these concepts come and go. But Natasha Sideris is a very, very smart operator, and so she's in the book and as a really inspirational feature in there. How many ocean baskets are there in the world? That's a question.
I don't know. I've not done my homework.
There are 200 in South Africa.
I know that. You can't move without finding one of those.
Exactly. And there are more than 200 outside of South Africa. Now, Grace Harding runs Ocean Basket, started by a guy called Fats Lazaridis in Rivonia. 7 tables, fish and chips and calamari, bring your own wine. And if you make a mess on the tablecloth, wipe it up. It's plastic. It'll be fine. Really not a flashy place at all, but was bringing affordable seafood to the suburbs. And seafood is, in many parts of the world, is silver, crystal, and white linen. It's massively exclusive and very, very expensive. We had Villa Mora. I don't know if you're old enough to remember Villa Mora, very posh seafood restaurant. It didn't last, unfortunately, but it was brilliant. But then Ocean Basket came in at a sweet spot in seafood, and it's not the very best quality seafood in the world. You'll get better langoustines, I'm sure, at the Ritz, but it brings that seafood experience to the family. And what Grace Harding has done, she took seafood to the Mediterranean. I remember interviewing her at the time, 10, 12 years ago. They've now got 7 ocean baskets in Malta.
In Malta, of all places.
And none of the fish and chips, well, none of the fish they sell there, I think, comes from the Mediterranean because the place has been fished out. So they've got global supply chains and stuff all comes in from all over the world. And that's their distribution center for Europe. And they're growing in Europe. And again, in the UK, they opened their first store in Bromley in early 2022, and a second one in Richmond, southwest of London. So they're in the southeast, now in the southwest. And there's a huge South African diaspora, of course, which is your first client base as you go into a new market. And who were their greatest helpers when they arrived? But Nando's. They said, welcome, it's so lovely to have you. Thanks for coming. Cheers, how can we help? And Nando's, of course, a great South African success story. When Karol Ostaszewski, now Karol is Karol with a K and he's a man, he's a Londoner, his parents were Polish. I met up with him at the Polish Club in Kensington, London, in museum sort of district of London last year. And we chatted about Scolly cider, Sxollie. And I'd come across Scolly cider in Elgin in the Western Cape, and it's delicious, single varietal, crispy, Granny Smith and Golden Delicious. And now they've got Pink Lady apple. And the apples are picked, and I've met the apple producer who picks the apples and then sends them to a wine farm called Almenkerk, which is just behind the Peregrine Farm stall, just around the corner from Appletiser, another global success story from the Elgin Valley. And these apples are crushed and pressed and made into cider at this farm, Almenkerk, and then put into these massive 26,000 litre stainless steel tanks and shipped to Liverpool.
Liverpool.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly why, but there's a reason. There's a port, and it's cheaper possibly than going anywhere else. And bottled there and gassed there, and then distributed. Now, their first client was Harrods. They went to Harrods and said, we can give you single varietal ciders. We can give you a cider with a lower carbon footprint than any cider on your shelves at the moment, especially the British ciders that you sell. They said, well, we haven't listed a new cider for 10 years. I said, the good, well, there's another reason you should carry our cider. And they tried them and they put them on the shelves of Harrods. And so Harrods became the sort of first place that Scolly cider ended up being showcased in the UK. It's now at every single Waitrose in the UK, and Waitrose is posh Woolies. It's very high-end grocery retail. It's in every single Nando's, because Nando's likes the South African connection, so you can go and have your burger and you can have a Scolly cider with it. And I think I saw them in a Tesco the last time I was in London, and they're getting traction. I saw them in a pub as well on tap. So they certainly are making inroads, and they're selling 98% of what they produce out of Almenkerk in the UK. Very little consumption in South Africa, simply because the price point is twice as high as Savannah and Hunters, which is made by Distell. Distell, incidentally, the second biggest manufacturer of cider in the world, after Heineken, which owns Bulmers and others. Heineken recently bought Distell, which makes Heineken the biggest by a long way cider producer in the world. But it's these unique properties of South African innovations and these abilities to collaborate and cooperate with global multinationals and seeing the opportunity set. I was talking to a guy the other day who makes a fantastic cold box called Field Bar. I don't know if you've seen them. They look like mini Smeg fridges.
All over the gram and the top, yes. The influencers love it.
Exactly. And who in London is selling the Field Bar? Harrods.
That makes more sense to me.
Absolutely. And so you're getting, this stuff is made in observatory, so it's 100% made in South Africa. They've got absolute quality control. They've got all of the elements to it. It's beautifully designed. It is a magnificent piece of showy, offy, blingy gloriousness to take on your next picnic. And it also
consumption.
Conspicuous consumption, and it also works, keeps your drinks cold, which is kind of important. It's fairly practical, and it's nice and robust. You can drop it, it gets dented, your drinks will be fine. And these sort of innovations and designs and things are coming from South Africa. And so often we get stuck in the Eeyore vortex of negativity, and people who lift their eyes above the parapet. I was talking to a guy the other day, and he runs a business called Roscoe. I forget even what he does. What he does doesn't matter. But he was just saying, like, I want more people just to look for opportunity, because there is so much opportunity. And this economy is 0.5% of global GDP, $436 billion economy and $100 trillion global economy. We are tiny. Yet the number of really smart people and businesses that emerge from South Africa then take those ideas and their products and sell them globally, because this market is so small. There's a very tiny upper crust that can afford the Field Bar, the Scully cider, Nando's 3 times a week, and all of this sort of stuff. So you've got to take the smart idea global. And I think in a way that almost breeds a particular view on how to grow your business. And it says, we're not going to succeed as we would like to here. So let's actually start with the end in mind and say, we'll learn our lessons here, and let's take these and explode them globally. And I think that's where perhaps the strength and the resilience and the fortitude of many South African businesses comes from.
I think you've articulated the opportunity very well, right? I mean, like it's quite obvious listening to you and just sort of looking around that places like this where there's a bit of chaos and we might have lots of red tape, but let's be honest, there's generally ways around it to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. It's a great testing case in laboratory for trying out new ideas. It's also full of gaps in the marketplace that can be filled, and it's full of problems that can be solved. So it is a great place to create entrepreneurs and to create business successes. But what if we turn around and say, how good are these success stories actually for South Africa itself? How does that circle get squared? Because listening to you about how all the success stories, almost all of them, yes, there are a few exceptions, but almost all the success stories you have are either backed by international capital, which means that the lion's share of the profits is ending up in Silicon Valley VC pockets, not, you know, in the local community, whatever the CSI plan is. I try not to be too cynical about CSI, but, you know, it's hard not to. Or the plan is to expand internationally. And so actually use this as a launching pad rather than as an end destination. So how do we square that circle? How good are these exceptions that sort of prove the rule for South Africa itself?
I think they're exceptional for South Africa itself. I mean, Discovery employs 10,000, 12,000 people in South Africa. You know, so that's 10 or 12,000 jobs that wouldn't exist.
They practically are Amazon, right? I mean, like, you know, if you like they employ
not quite.
Right?
But all of these South African startups, so if these businesses that start in South Africa don't leave, you know, some do and some will go and do other things, but the people that grow the apples that get pressed and then put into the containers and then sent to the UK, sure, the value is really acquired in the UK, but there's a huge amount of work done in South Africa. We don't beneficiate nearly enough. Let's be absolutely clear about that. So we have huge raw material deposits and things, and you know, it's not your job as the entrepreneur to fix South Africa. Your job is to run your business to the best of your ability, to add as much value as you can, to create a business that is sustainable in the long term, that brings value to you, your shareholders, and to the people who work for you. Hopefully, they get to benefit from the contribution that they make to your business through salaries, possibly a share option one day, maybe a profit share, and that's your job. And if you outgrow the environment, well, that's fine. You've outgrown the environment. You don't have a responsibility to fix the place. That's why we choose politicians. So it's a stuff.
We pay taxes, right? It's like, you know, but we like to pay for everything twice here in South Africa.
At least we pay for, and the nice thing is we get to do that with electricity, because if you want to put solar panels on your roof, you have to pay Eskom anyway. You know, got to get permission to put a borehole in. You got to, you know, your education and security and private healthcare, all of these things. I did see somebody on social media over the weekend saying, instead of people putting their children into private schools, they should donate money to the Department of Education. And that way everybody would benefit, because you pay 6 or 7 or 8,000 rand a month, and it costs 1,000 rand a month to educate a government kid. Well, you can educate 8 kids for that price. Well, that's brilliant. What a lovely idea. Thank you for your valuable contribution to a debate that you shouldn't be part of. My word. Anyway, and yeah, people, unfortunately, my late great, not my great grandfather, but my late great grandfather, would say there's nothing common about common sense. We often lack common sense in our debates. Our debates are very emotional. Our debates are seldom based on fact. And I know that you're a lover of the fact, and that you base your arguments only on fact. But in South Africa's arguments are emotional. They are, and understandably in many cases so, because of the way people have been treated for 350 years, quite frankly. If you've been treated the way most people, 370 years, 1650, yeah, 370 years. And people have been treated like dirt for a very long time in South Africa. So you are going to have a really different perspective if you are poor and marginalized in South Africa, particularly if 30 years ago that you were promised that nirvana was around the corner, and it certainly hasn't been delivered to you in any form that you might have anticipated it would be.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the point I'm getting towards, that in this country there is a debate. In fact, not just in this country, in the world at large, particularly in the Western order of the world. And let's face it, we are part of the Western order. We consume Western culture and content all the time. We don't live in a vacuum here in South Africa. We're definitely more Westernized than we are African. I know that's probably quite a heretical thing to say, but culture, politics, our ideas around democracy have been shaped by the West. And there is this overriding kind of subtext that the private sector is anti the public sector, and the public sector is, of course, opposed to the private sector. In many ways, they kind of are, very practically, in this country. Like, you know, we don't have a government that can provide electricity or functioning sort of law and order. They are actually antagonistic towards private sector succeeding. And it's quite clear in your book, especially with your opening chapters, that these people are success stories in spite of, not because of government. But at the same time,
I think that, yes, in spite of and because of government, because government has opened up the market. It has failed. And where there is failure, was it nature hates a vacuum, right? So, you know, the vacuum is filled by capability and success. And so actually government failure.
That's going a bit too far. I mean, like if getting out of the way helps other people to do things better, that's not you helping them. That's just you admitting that you were harming them previously. Poking at a pinch of salt. But anyway, the point is that there's a huge sense that you kind of got to pick a side, right? Are you on the side of the people and solving social issues and you know, like being a good person, or are you on the side of the capitalists, right? And how do we fix that? How do we fix that story, that narrative that says that you can either be successful or you could be a good person? And hence, I don't think it's through CSI campaigns, because this idea that we should allow corporates and CEOs to be in charge of directing capital to solve social issues is quite frankly laughable. Sorry to all my libertarian.
You've been politically incorrect, so I'm going to be politically incorrect. What did Maggie Thatcher do in the middle of the 1980s? She's still to this day vilified by elements of British society. But Britain was broken. 1970s, Britain had things.
She was a woman in power. People don't like that.
Okay, she was a woman. Her first failure, right? Her first failure. She was a woman.
Not in practice.
And she was strong and independent-minded and smart.
All the things you want them to be, but as soon as you get one of those, but not like that.
No, you can't have that. Anyway, but they had this thing. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's you have a series of power cuts. It's called load shedding. And Britain was going through load shedding.
In the 70s, it was
dark.
Dark
it was
and cold.
A terrible time. Arthur Scargill, the miners' strikes. And she broke the back of the trade unions in the United Kingdom, and people still hate her for that. They hate the fact that industry moved out of Britain. They hate the fact that coal mining moved out of Britain, the fact that coal was almost finished anyway, and that the technologies needed to move on.
This doesn't sound familiar at all, Bruce. It sounds completely alien.
But Thatcher revolutionized the way Britain operated. And it said, actually, you can be responsible for yourself. And there's still a heavy dependency, and we're moving, one looks at the state of the NHS in the United Kingdom at the moment, and it is under huge strain. It's not properly funded. People can't just go and see a GP, so they go and wait in the emergency ward and for 10 hours to get 3 stitches above their eye if they get hit by a hockey stick or whatever the case may be.
Aren't we trying to do that here too? Isn't that the future we're pushing for?
I suspect that's exactly where we're going. And these systems, unfortunately, are unsustainable. You want there are systems that work really well, and systems with almost full employment where everybody contributes in equal proportion of their wage to a central kitty. You can do fairly well. I think the Northern European countries do rather well in their sort of social democratic approach.
Very few people and very large natural resource endowments, but we don't need to talk about that.
Yeah, but so we have relatively per square kilometer, very few people. We have large resource endowments. What we don't have is educated, capable, entrepreneurial, technologically able people, because we've treated people really badly for such a long period of time. So we've got a huge amount of catching up to do. And unfortunately, people don't want to be told, you know what, your great-great-great-grandchildren are going to be so well off because of what you're going to sacrifice today. They're going to tell you to piss off. And
what grandchildren? So, we're all like having less kids, right?
Exactly. And when, Mike, after experiencing me as a father, I don't think my kids will ever get to have children. But it's this idea of business is bad and government is good, or government is bad and business is good.
Like you have to pick a side, which
absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And where we
permeates conversations all the time.
But it's easy because it's simple. I mean, it's so much easier to be dogmatic in an argument. If you don't believe in grey, well, then you don't have to debate anything. You can just take a very dogmatic view, and you can be. I mean, Patrick Craven, a sweet man, a man with deep values, a spokesman of COSATU for many years. Pravin Gordon, bless him, an honest and really a man of extreme integrity. But when I was in Davos a couple of years ago with him, and I stood toe to toe with him, I said, "Please, Minister, give SAA away. Give it away." And
why do we split this thing? Yeah.
And he went, "Over my dead body." And it was just like, okay, dude, please, just give it away. He's like, "No, it's not where I come from. I can't even countenance doing that." What did he do effectively in the deal that is yet to be finalized, in the Takatsu consortium deal? He gave SAA away, but he gave away a shadow of what it had been 6 or 7 years ago, before Dudu Myeni and before the evisceration of skills and hope and optimism within that organization. If we'd given it away back then, we would have the SAA tailplane all over the world, still flying internationally,
still fly to South America,
operated by somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and it's so silly. And that's my strongest word of the day, silly. I think we're silly. And collaboration is
each other. We don't trust each other. Like, no. And there's very good reasons why vast swaths don't trust capital and vice versa, right? Like but
that's healthy.
Have broken each other's trust. There should be tension, but you should be able to still have a functional relationship. And we need to work on that.
If we trusted government's intent, if we trusted the government's intention was truly to elevate the standing of everybody in society, so that you could grow to the very best of your ability, and that you could advance yourself and your family, and you were allowed to do that. You could do it with a degree of certainty. If we trusted that was truly government's intention, that's what they say they believe in, but that's not how they behave. And that if you're a civil servant, you don't have 12 companies that fight for tenders constantly, because if you're doing that, you're not focusing on your day job. And if you are a director general, your job is earning 1.4 million Rand a year, which is a fantastic wage, and you are committed to doing that. And you run that government department to the very best of your ability, and you make sure everybody in your department does their work to deliver outcomes to your citizens. And you then say to the private sector, we're also going to, we would like you to provide electricity for us, and we're going to pay you at this level, and we will give you these sorts of increments over the next 5 years. We'll renegotiate in 5 years' time, but you've got absolute certainty for the next 5 years. We're not going to pay you 1 penny more, but we guarantee you this sort of payment. You can then you could distribute the electricity and charge what you like as you distribute it, or get private sector to distribute it as well. But just if we trusted government's ability to do stuff, and its integrity in doing it, then you can have private sector suppliers supplying into a regulated environment, you wouldn't have any excess of profit. You wouldn't have any price gouging going on. I mean, privatization of UK rail sounded like a very good idea. They're very nice trains, but it's not working in the way it should. And none of these systems are designed to be infallible over long periods of time. They need to be reworked every 10 or 15 years anyway. And the UK is going through that. It's actually going through this metamorphosis now across all of its industries. I mean,
I have a theory about that.
A winter of discontent, yeah.
Privatizing actual monopolies where there's real scarcity, like a rail, there's only one line, it doesn't end up with the same sorts of net goods as privatizing actually competitive markets, which is the opportunity around electricity and airlines that is very different from other sorts of social projects that probably should have, where there is a natural monopoly, you kind of do want a regulator or a state-owned enterprise in charge to a certain extent, or it will fall apart.
But it's got to be run within
things, though, do we? We don't distinguish between natural monopolies and unnatural monopolies. And our unnatural monopolies are crippling our economy at the moment, right? So whether that's both the private ones and the public ones. Yep. Hi, all your telecoms operators. We see you. We don't like you. We know that you have unfair advantage, right? Extortionary landlords of the digital space. But whatever, that's
hold on. I like extortionary landlords of the digital space. There's a title.
Everything as a service, yeah.
Extortionary landlords of the digital space. Oh, that's
what I'm interviewing next week. A gentleman from the US who's written a book on Georgism, which is coming back into fashion, and I'm here for it.
Excellent.
But yes, Bruce, what are your advice to South Africans and everyone else listening to this? How do we get more genius and less idiocy in our economies? What are the things that you've learned? All these marvelous studies.
I don't know how to get less idiocy. There's a surfeit of idiocy. There are always going to be idiots.
Idiots will always be among us. Jesus, probably.
Yuval Noah Harari. Power comes from knowing what to ignore. And I think that is so absolutely critical. We're in a world that is so swamped with information, misinformation, and disinformation that we are, I think, so often paralyzed into inaction, and we're paralyzed into insecurity, and we stop trying to, we get absolutely confused as to what the future looks like. I think you need to chart a course. I think you need to have a broadly optimistic view, not a naive view, not an idiotic view. You've got to be optimistic that humans generally have done pretty well up until now, with brief periods of lunacy in between, of making progress. Occasionally there's a massive disruption where a perversity comes in, whether it be a Hitler or a Stalin or a Mao or any one of these people who comes in with a rabid ideology that disrupts for a period of time and causes massive upheaval and destruction. But you kind of, humanity bandies together, whether it be Putin in Ukraine or however that plays out, you kind of bring back to the center again, and progress resumes. So yes, the periods of enormous disruption, we're going through a period of disruption at the moment, and it's horrible. However, if you're going to wait for certainty to emerge, if you're going to wait for clarity, if you're going to wait to be told, okay, today's the day for you, it's safe today, and it's going to be absolutely fine, and there'll be no problems for you in the future, you're dead. Go and get a job, and don't expect to do anything fabulous for yourself or your family or your descendants into the future. If, however, you have a brilliant idea. I said to Brian Joffe, who started Bidvest in 1987, the same year that Robbie Brosen and Fernando Duarte started Nando's. And do you remember 1987? No, you wouldn't remember 1987, but 1987.
My sister was born that year. It was a very distressing year.
Exactly. You see how much went wrong in 1987? 1987 was a terrible year. It was 2 years after the Rubicon speech of P.W. Botha. South Africa was bankrupt morally, politically, socially. It defaulted on its debts. We were a global pariah. Barclays had pulled out of South Africa. Anglo-American and SAB owned everything. They were the buyers of last resort. P.W. Botha had one.
unnatural monopolists, right?
Absolutely. But unwilling natural monopolists in their case, because they didn't want to be brewers and book owners and newspaper, well, the newspaper owners were probably useful to them, but they had too much control. And
they were great at their purchases. Yeah.
1987, the P.W. Botha is still holding on to power. Nobody's standing up against him. He's a vicious and nasty bastard of a man. And he's running a police state, and he's using every avenue at his disposal with the limited resources that he has, but he runs out of money. And he runs out of money. That coincides with him having a second stroke, which is more debilitating than the first. And F.W. de Klerk wins an internal tussle within the National Party. And he is, and some people are appalled by this idea that he was the more liberal part of the National Party at the time. I don't know if he was liberal or pragmatic, but certainly he understood that the status quo could not hold. And he had the vision and the good sense to go, we need to negotiate the best possible deal we can, because otherwise there is a disastrous consequence here. At the same sort of time, well, we didn't yet know it in 1987, 88, 89, but Rwanda was brewing. And what played out in Rwanda and the genocide there in 93, 94 at the time of South Africa's political transition could so easily have happened here. And people, you've got to read Peter Louis Myburgh's ANC Billionaires. It's a really nice consolidated view of that period of time and how big business interceded and had the political conversation and brought politicians on side. And politicians there was this sort of tussle between capital and politics. It was a healthy tussle. And perhaps it's time for that sort of healthy tussle once again to sort of find an equilibrium. But 1987 was a terrible time. And I said to Brian Duffy, why on earth would you, smart guy, in your early 30s, you could have gone anywhere in the world, all of your classmates had gone. Why did you decide to start Bidvest in South Africa then? He said, well, I liked Chipkins and it was available. And I said, but you could have gone and bought anything. He said, yeah, but I was here and it was lekker and it was great. And I could see an opportunity. So I bought Chipkins and yeah, the rest is history. And he built this multi-billion-dollar operation, created Bidvest, then created Bidcorp and consolidated global food restaurant supplies everywhere except America because it's just too competitive. And then Bidcorp and Bidvest are split out from one another. But just this extraordinary creation of value in one lifetime by an individual with a vision. And he fully admits, he said, look, I mean, it was the Wild West in the mid to late 1990s. There was no competition commission. They could grow and they moved really quickly because they knew at some point their wings would be clipped. And I think when it came to Long for Life, which was his sort of second attempt at a listing, and I think he got quite frustrated when it didn't come off the way he thought it would, because he couldn't operate in the same sort of Wild West that he did in the 1990s, because there were no rules and regulations and constraints as such, that actually it was much, much harder this time around. But it is people who are able to flex, people who are able to think about a better future than the present, who ultimately are more likely to succeed than those who sort of sit back and wait, or those who simply dismiss the future as a disaster, or those who don't bother even trying. Adrian Gore, one last thought on Adrian Gore. He said, these kids say, so what do we need to do to succeed? And he says it's the toughest question he's ever been asked, because, I mean, as somebody who is, I think, fairly successful, and he says,
all right.
he says to his kids, just don't do what everybody else does. And that's the hardest thing.
Or what everybody else doesn't. Which is probably more to the point.
Yes, don't do what everyone else doesn't, and certainly don't do what everyone else does. If you simply follow the herd, you're never going to be exceptional. And so being unique is exceptional. It gives you the opportunity to be exceptional. And I think so often you've only got to you go to any informal markets anywhere in the world, and you will see everybody has a little stall with the same 5 products at the same price point, because nobody wants to outprice anybody else or underprice anybody else. And the moment somebody brings in erasers and puts an eraser on the desk and that sells, suddenly everybody's got erasers on their tables. It's that thing where everybody's the same, nobody can fail, nobody can succeed. And that's kind of tedious. And where we have exceptionalism in South Africa is people who dare to be different, people who dare to see the future differently, and people who have operated in a really, really treacherous and difficult environment, which is South Africa. And I think if you can survive here, you can survive anywhere. And many people have taken that attitude, by the way, globally, and have failed dismally because they've gone with a level of hubris and arrogance, fueled by their great success in South Africa. They've been taught swift lessons in humility elsewhere. Pardon?
I will words and co. Many.
But our success stories are truly great success stories. And they're told in Genius, How to Take Smart Ideas Global, soon to be relabeled How to Thrive at the Edge of Chaos, because it is.
Who knows?
Always.
Yeah, maybe including your story if you're listening, right? I mean, like, I don't know, you doing any updates for this one, or is it just the hardcover?
There are no updates. It's a relabeling. It's a rebranding. It's a relaunch. It couldn't be better. I put up perfection the first time around.
Exactly, but there's a podcast coming. But wait, there's more. So we gotta be patient for that and hear more of these stories.
It's so interesting. Content is such an interesting thing, isn't it? Because it's one thing to read people's stories, but it's one thing to hear them tell their stories. And so I have in my telephone in here, I have so far recorded 5 interviews. If I lose this, I think it's backed up to the cloud.
Yeah.
I can't remember what my cloud password is, but I'm sure I've written it down somewhere. And in there are the life stories of 5 incredible South Africans. I need 3 more for this particular series. And those will launch probably by the middle of February. They'll be all over the place. You won't be able to miss them. And hopefully people like the podcasts too. So if you like the podcast, we'll go to a second edition of those, which will be the smaller, more intimate stories of people who are succeeding. One last story.
Still succeeding.
Desperation is also a great motivator. Desperation is a great motivator. And I think so many South Africans are desperate. And Sam Skyring. Have you ever met Sam Skyring? Have you ever seen Oryx Desert Salt?
Yeah, I think I have some in the kitchen.
There we go. And Oryx Desert Salt comes from a brine resource deep under the Kalahari. And Sam won't mind me saying this. She was on the bare bones of her backside. She was in trouble, single mom. She didn't have any prospects. She didn't have a job, but she had an idea. So she got her kid's dad to look after him for a bit, and she set about creating the brand of Oryx Desert Salt, got the access to the salt, bottled it and branded it, and started selling it into boutique sort of shops and things. And 2021 got her first contract with Whole Foods in the United States, and now she exports salt harvested from underneath the Kalahari Desert, where it has no impurities whatsoever. Most table salt in the world now, by the virtue of the fact that the sea is so polluted, has microplastics in it. I mean, the sodium is going to kill you long before the plastic does. I wouldn't worry too much about it, but it gives you a unique selling point that this is a pure salt that is untainted by the world outside. And she's taken this beautifully branded product and exporting tens of thousands of tons of this stuff into the Whole Foods market in the United States. You don't need a great big technological idea. You don't need to be reinventing Steve Jobs' iPhone. You don't need to be creating a new payment system, although that seems to be the most popular South African pastime.
South Africans, like, how many payment options do we need? Guys, different problem.
Fintechs, Brew. You got to do fintech, ride your mountain bike and drink cappuccino first thing in the morning, and then you're up for a great day. But
solve that problem.
You can have a fairly simple idea and really focus in on it and grow a great sustainable business. And Sam Skyring is a wonderful example of somebody who'd gone, oh dear, I'm in trouble. I need something that's unique, something that I can brand, something I can differentiate. And she's doing marvelous things. It's lovely.
I love the way so many of your examples are about real things and not about technology.
Tech is wonderful, and tech is enabling, and tech is glorious, but it's so
right. It's great
boring.
Failing, but it's not interesting. I love real problems being solved by real people. I like businesses that you can touch and taste and feel. See, it feels more sustainable in the long run, right? Because the whole thing with technology is about moving capital around faster, which is just hugely profitable. I mean, if by all means, if you can do it, go ahead and do it. But it's not creating new value. It's just sort of increasing the speed with which it shifts hands, hopefully into your own, which is the plan with most sort of software service businesses. But real businesses are, for me, most interesting. And I think they're having a moment at the moment. It's very on trend, Bruce. So love that.
Oh, look at me.
We got to eat, we got to keep warm. Winter is coming, solve those problems. We like those problems being solved.
I'm going to go a wood cutter. I'm going to go cut down trees, dry the wood. They're going to be needed this winter.
It might just, if you're in the UK, it's already needed again, right? I mean, the past catches up with you quite fast these days.
No, absolutely. I mean, it is. I mean, there is what do the Germans call it? Schadenfreude. I mean, one of South Africa's most successful exports so far has been load shedding. We first sent it to China and then to Australia, and then there was a threat of load.
There are gas shortages.
Exactly. We export all our best stuff.
We're a glimpse of the future, not a throwback to an embarrassing past. I think this is what I like to tell people who don't live here. We've dealt with that. And we did, even with issues around sort of social justice and around gender issues and equality issues and issues of race. Those difficult conversations, we have not solved it by any means. But we started the process a little bit ahead of the game. I think that there's many things that the rest of the world can learn from us and hopefully buy from us. Please do buy South African. Like we like your money. You can send it back to us now.
Absolutely. We don't mind taking your money. We'll give you great things.
Open for business. Even the government says so. Isn't that great?
Okay, you just ruined everything, I'm leaving. Goodbye.
Hi, Bruce. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people get hold of you before you go if you want to be found?
I do want to be found. I'm found everywhere. The best place is brucewhitfield.com or on LinkedIn or on Twitter or on Facebook or on Instagram or at home if you know where I live. If you don't, well, I'm not going to tell you.
There you have it. Bruce Whitfield, a genius. Thank you for joining us today.
The book is called Genius.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and rate us on all your preferred podcast platforms. If you'd like to find out more about what we're doing, please join our Substack community via the link in the comments below. And as always, we'd love to hear your suggestions for future guests and conversation topics.